Some people carry a quiet weight that others their age cannot see. It shows in their stillness, in the way they move through rooms without rushing, in the way their eyes seem to hold stories they never had the chance to tell. They are young only on paper. Inside, their thoughts move slowly, their emotions feel heavier, their awareness stretches far beyond their years. People call them wise, old souls, or mature for their age, but those words never touch the truth, because for many, this older than their age feeling is not a blessing. It is a consequence of growing up too fast, worrying too early, caring too deeply, or witnessing more than a child should. And quietly they wonder, when did life become something they had to survive instead of simply live? There comes a moment, often small and almost unnoticeable, when a person first realizes they do not feel the same age as those around them. It might happen in a classroom, when other children laugh loudly over things that feel distant to them. It might appear during a teenage conversation filled with excitement and recklessness that they cannot find any place inside themselves to echo. Or later, in early adulthood, when friends chase spontaneity while they crave stability, silence, or depth. The recognition is rarely loud. It forms slowly, like a soft pressure beneath the skin, an inner knowledge that something about their emotional timeline has always been out of sync with their actual age. For people who feel older than their age, the world often appears too fast, too bright, too casual. They watch others their age glide through life with a lightness they cannot imitate. When everyone else seems drawn toward expansion, louder experiences, bigger risks, wider social circles, these individuals gravitate toward observation rather than participation. Their mind wanders to deeper questions, heavier meanings, subtler signals in the people around them. Even as children, they notice emotions others overlook. A parent's tired sigh, a friend's hidden sadness, the tension behind a closed door, and without being taught, they begin to carry these emotions, quietly, as if someone entrusted them with responsibilities no one ever spoke aloud. This early difference creates a strange kind of distance, not a physical one, but an emotional separation that others rarely recognize. They can sit among people their age and still feel apart, as though they were visiting rather than belonging. Conversations feel lighter than their thoughts. Games feel simpler than their worries. And the things that fascinate others, approval, popularity, excitement, feel strangely unimportant to them. They sense life from a slightly elevated height, as if they were looking down on the scene rather than standing inside it, not because they want to, but because something within them developed too early, too deeply. For many, this recognition is accompanied by a quiet loneliness, a loneliness that doesn't come from isolation, but from difference. They watch friends move with ease through phases they themselves cannot access. When others seem carefree, they feel the weight of caution. When others make impulsive choices, they sense consequences long before they arrive. When others flirt with chaos, they search for safety. And though no one says it aloud, they become the responsible one, the calm one, the understanding one. Roles often assigned to people far older. With time, they begin to notice how much they are holding. The worries, the awareness, the emotional labor, the constant scanning of their environment for tension or subtle shifts in mood. While children their age were absorbed in their own worlds, they were already learning to read the room. While others sought freedom, they sought stability. While others were forming childhood memories, they were forming emotional strategies. And in this quiet recognition lies a deeper truth. They did not choose to feel older. They became older because life pushed them forward before they were ready. Their mind grew in the shadows of things they could not yet name. Their sensitivity sharpened in moments they had no language for. Their emotional maturity emerged not through wisdom, but through adaptation. Even now, as adults, They often sense this difference before they understand it. They notice how comfortable they are in silence, how naturally they listen instead of speak, how deeply they feel, even when they try not to. They notice how exhaustion strikes them earlier, how chaos overwhelms them faster, how peace feels more essential to their survival than excitement ever did. And still, they move through the world as if carrying a story no one else has read. This recognition is the beginning, the first doorway. The moment someone realizes that feeling older than their age is not an identity, it is an inheritance, a quiet imprint left by everything they've survived without acknowledging it. There is always a beginning, even if the person doesn't remember it clearly. A moment in childhood when something shifted inside them, when playfulness began to fade, when innocence thinned out, when they started paying attention to things children were never meant to understand. No one announces it. Parents don't notice it. Friends can't see it. But somewhere quietly, childhood ends earlier for some than for others. Often it begins in households where unpredictability becomes a daily companion, where a child learns to listen for footsteps, for the tone of a voice, for the way a door closes. Not because they are curious, but because it feels necessary. These children learn emotional weather long before they learn multiplication tables. They study the atmosphere of the home the way others study cartoons. They become experts at reading tension, anticipating conflict, soothing the energy around them before it erupts. This is how emotional maturity grows too fast. Not from knowledge, but from vigilance. Some experience a different kind of acceleration, the quiet, invisible weight of becoming the responsible one. The child who wakes up a little earlier because their parent is tired. The one who comforts siblings, checks on adults, fills in the emotional gaps of the household. They aren't told to do it. They just sense the need. They become the helper, the listener, the peacekeeper. Their childhood becomes a role, their emotions become tasks, and their own needs step aside so they can carry the ones around them. Then there are the children who grow up surrounded by silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that settles in homes where affection is rare. These children become wise because loneliness forces them inward. They find comfort in daydreams, books, imaginary conversations, anything that feels safer than the emotional distance of the adults around them. They grow older because solitude becomes their teacher, and self-reliance becomes their only form of security. And some children mature too fast because they witness things that carve lines into their innocence. A parent's sadness, a sudden loss, a breakup they were too young to understand, but old enough to feel. They absorb emotional truths that are far beyond their age. They learn that love is fragile, that people leave, that stability is temporary. Their heart grows older simply because it had to make sense of pain too early. In all these scenarios, the child begins to form a quiet rule within themselves. Stay aware, stay responsible, stay composed. It becomes a survival strategy they don't even realize they are creating. And slowly, their inner world becomes shaped by responsibilities they never agreed to carry. While other children break things and laugh and forget about it, these children cannot afford the luxury of being careless. They think before they act. They observe before they speak. They take on the emotional shape of adults because someone in their world needed them to. But what makes this early maturity so haunting is how invisible it is. No one notices the child who grows up too fast. In fact, adults often praise them. So mature for your age, so well behaved, so responsible. They hear these words and feel a small sting they cannot describe. Because deep down, they know this isn't who they are. It is who they became to keep the world around them from breaking. This early shaping does not disappear with time. It becomes the blueprint for adulthood. The person who feels older than their age is often just the child who adapted too soon and never had a chance to return to their original pace. Their seriousness is not a personality trait, it is a memory. Their caution is not wisdom, it is protection. Their emotional depth is not giftedness, it is an imprint of every moment life demanded more from them than they were ready to give. The childhood that grew too fast creates adults who carry themselves with a quiet knowing, not because they learned more, but because they lost more earlier. There is a difference between growing older and feeling older. One is biological, the other is psychological. And for the people who feel older than their age, the shift doesn't happen in the skin or bones. It happens in the nervous system, in the emotional circuitry, in the brain's early attempts to make sense of a world that felt too complex too soon. Neuroscience shows that a child exposed to chronic unpredictability begins to operate from heightened awareness. The amygdala, the brain's danger signal, becomes more active than usual. It learns to scan quicker, respond faster, anticipate earlier. A nervous system shaped like this grows efficient at survival, but weaker at rest. And rest is where youth is supposed to live. When rest is unsafe, childhood becomes shortened. Over time, the brain adapts to this hyper-awareness. It doesn't ask for permission, it simply adjusts. Neural pathways strengthen around responsibility, caution, emotional caretaking, empathy. Pathways related to spontaneity, exploration, and carefree behavior remain underdeveloped, not because the person lacks them, but because their early environment did not give them space to grow. Emotional aging begins here, not in wisdom, but in wiring. Psychology adds another layer, attachment theory. Children who felt emotionally responsible for others or emotionally neglected often develop what is called precocious competence. It means they learn adult emotional skills before childlike emotional needs are ever met. They learn to soothe others before they have ever been soothed. They learn to understand emotions before they are allowed to express their own. This premature competence becomes mistaken for maturity, but inside it creates a subtle ache, a feeling that life is heavier than it should be. Empathy plays a role too. Research shows that highly sensitive individuals process emotional information more deeply. Their mirror neuron systems fire stronger. They absorb micro-expressions, tone shifts, and emotional undercurrents that most people overlook. This deeper processing creates emotional fatigue, a kind of internal tiredness that makes them feel older, not in years, but in emotional weight carried. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, analyzing, and understanding consequences, develops faster in some children under chronic stress. The brain accelerates maturity to help them survive, just as a plant grows toward light. This advanced executive functioning can look like wisdom, but it is often a scar, a sign the child had to grow capable too early to stay safe. Even the concept of time changes. People who felt responsible from a young age often report a stretched inner sense of time. They describe feeling like they've lived multiple lives before adulthood even arrives. Their memories are filled not with childish exploration, but with emotional management, premature reflection, and a constant need to hold themselves together. The brain encodes these experiences as weight, and weight often feels like age. There is also the psychology of emotional labor. Studies show that performing emotional regulation for others, soothing, managing, predicting, absorbing, consumes cognitive resources similar to physical work. A child who becomes the emotional anchor of their home ages internally through the strain of constant responsibility, even if no one sees it happening. And then there is trauma, both big and small. Trauma does not always leave visible marks. Sometimes it's simply a chronic absence of safety or affection. The nervous system memorizes this absence as work, the work of monitoring, adapting, staying alert. A nervous system that never rests begins to believe it is older than it actually is. All of this forms a constellation of internal aging, heightened vigilance, deep empathy, early responsibility, emotional labor, premature competence, accelerated neural development. These forces combine to create a person who feels older, not because they have lived longer, but because they have carried more. Their soul ages the way metal weathers, quietly, slowly, under pressure no one else could see. There is a strange paradox that lives inside people who feel older than their age. On the surface, they appear composed, grounded, and emotionally self-sufficient. They're the ones others trust, the ones who listen without interrupting, the ones who carry themselves with a quiet steadiness that feels rare in a world obsessed with noise. Yet beneath that calm exterior lies a tension they rarely speak about, a contradiction between the maturity they show and the vulnerability they secretly long for. This inner conflict begins with the roles they learned early in life. When a child becomes the observer, the protector, the emotional anchor, they learn quickly that softness is dangerous, that showing too much need might overwhelm someone, that asking for help could create disappointment. They grow up learning that silence keeps the peace, that composure earns safety, that being the strong one protects the fragile balance around them. These beliefs harden into habits, and habits become identities. The maturity others admire becomes a mask they don't know how to take off. Yet deep inside, there is a quieter, younger part of them that never had the chance to emerge. It carries the unspoken desire to relax, to be cared for, to feel understood without having to earn it. But this younger self lives in shadow, afraid of stepping forward because it contradicts everything they were taught to be. For them, vulnerability feels like walking into a room with no walls, too open, too exposed, too unsafe. So they stay guarded even when they crave connection. They stay distant even when they long for closeness. This conflict often shows up in relationships. People who feel older than their age tend to overfunction emotionally. They listen deeply, notice everything, anticipate needs before they're spoken. But when it comes time to express their own emotions, they hesitate, they pull back, they minimize, they worry about being too much or too needy, even when their needs are small and human. They fear becoming a burden because for most of their life, they were the one who carried burdens, not the one who placed them down. The struggle becomes sharper when they encounter people their own age. They watch others ask for help easily, express emotions freely, make mistakes without guilt. And although part of them envies this freedom, another part feels uneasy around it, as if they were watching a language they were never taught but somehow expected to speak. This dissonance creates a quiet ache, wanting the softness of youth but not knowing how to embody it. There is also the guilt, a guilt that whispers, "You should be fine," because on the outside they look fine. On the outside they seem composed. On the outside they appear strong, but internally they feel like someone carrying two identities at once. The older self that survived their childhood and the younger self that never lived it. This duality creates emotional fatigue. They become tired from always holding themselves together, tired from always being the stable one, tired from never having a place where their guard can fall without consequence. And yet, they resist letting go of this maturity, because even though it exhausts them, it also protects them. Being older inside feels safe, familiar, predictable. Becoming soft feels risky. Becoming carefree feels foreign. Becoming young, even emotionally, feels impossible. The internal conflict becomes a lifelong negotiation between longing and fear. At night, when the world is quiet, this conflict grows louder. They lie awake thinking about how much they handle alone. They wonder why it feels so difficult to relax around others. They sense the weight of emotions they never express, not because they don't want to, but because they never learned how. This is the hidden war within, a heart that wants softness, held by a nervous system that only trusts strength, a soul that wants connection, wrapped in a mind that survived by staying distant, an adult who acts older than their age, carrying the echo of a child who never got to be young. There comes a moment in every internally aged person's life when the weight they've carried for years begins to shift, not dramatically, not through chaos or collapse, but through a quiet, almost imperceptible cracking, like ice thawing after a long winter. A moment where the old maturity that once protected them begins to feel tight, heavy, or strangely out of place. It's the first sign that their inner age and outer age have drifted too far apart for too long. Sometimes this breaking point arrives in the form of exhaustion, a burnout so deep it doesn't look like sadness, but like emptiness. The person feels tired in a way sleep cannot fix. They sense that their strength is beginning to slip, not because they are weak, but because they have been strong for too long without rest. Their mind, once sharp with responsibility, begins to quiet. Their heart, once armored, begins to grow tender. They realize that the maturity they've worn like a shield has become a weight they can no longer comfortably hold. Other times, the breaking point comes through relationships. Someone enters their life who treats softness not as a flaw, but as something ordinary. A friend who asks, "How are you?" and waits for the real answer. A partner who gently notices when they are overwhelmed. A person who doesn't require them to be the calm one, the stable one, the wise one. And in these moments, the mask they've worn for years feels suddenly fragile. Something in them trembles, because being cared for feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things make the old guard inside them panic. Yet the longing for this care is undeniable. For some, the breaking point appears through loss, a death, a breakup, a moment that shakes their practiced composure. Grief does not care about maturity. Loss does not respect emotional responsibility. And for the first time, they experience emotions so strong that even their well-built internal scaffolding cannot hold everything in place. In the collapse, they glimpse their younger self, the part they hid away to survive. It rises, confused and tender, asking questions they've ignored for years. Why did I grow up so early? Who was I before responsibility replaced childhood? What did I lose without realizing it? And then there are those whose breaking point emerges not from pain, but from stillness. Life slows. Responsibilities shift. Something, work, routine, survival, suddenly pauses. And in the silence, the feelings they once outran begin to catch up. They sense an emotional backlog inside them. Moments they never processed, needs they never named, dreams they never allowed themselves to have. Without the noise of constant responsibility, their deeper truths begin to surface. This breaking point is not a dramatic moment of transformation. It is a subtle recognition. Feeling older than my age was never wisdom. It was survival. And survival is not meant to be permanent. They begin to realize that the maturity they built was shaped by fear, necessity, or lack. It protected them, but it also trapped them. It made them strong, but it also made them lonely. And for the first time, they feel the emotional cost of that strength. Their composure falters in tiny ways. A surprising tear, a sudden vulnerability, a moment of overwhelming tenderness. They find themselves craving things they once rejected: rest, gentleness, playfulness, care. Not because they are regressing, but because their inner world is finally asking to be seen as it truly is. This is the quiet, breaking point, not destruction, but awakening. A recognition that the emotional age they've been living at does not reflect the age of their body or the softness of their heart. And beneath this realization lies a deeper truth. The part of them that feels old is tired. The part of them that feels young is waiting. And both are asking for a life that feels more like living and less like surviving. Healing, for people who have always felt older than their age, does not arrive dramatically. It does not burst through the door with grand revelations or sudden transformations. Instead, it comes quietly, like morning light slipping through curtains after years of waking in the dark. It comes in small, almost invisible shifts, a loosening, a softening, a gentle permission they never allowed themselves before. It begins with noticing how tired they feel after years of emotional responsibility, noticing how their body relaxes when they no longer need to perform maturity, noticing how good it feels, even for a moment, to be understood without giving anything in return. This noticing creates space for emotions they once suppressed, for needs they once ignored, for softness they once feared. And in that space, the younger parts of them, the ones buried under years of survival, begin to rise slowly. They are not childish. They are simply unmet, waiting to breathe. For many, the return to themselves begins with allowing rest. True rest. Not the controlled kind where the mind stays alert, but the kind where the nervous system unclenches. The kind where they feel safe enough to stop scanning, stop anticipating, stop calculating. This rest is not laziness. It is repair. A kind of emotional exhale that their body has been holding back for years. Then comes the gentle rediscovery of joy. Not excitement, not adrenaline, not intensity, but quiet joy. The kind found in small pleasures. Warm sunlight on the face, music that feels like home, laughter that doesn't require effort, conversations where they don't need to be the wise one. These moments awaken the parts of them that never had the chance to grow. They begin to feel, for the first time, what youth might have felt like if life had been kinder. The integration also involves grief, a soft, honest grief. Not loud, not dramatic, just a steady recognition that they lost something along the way. Lost innocence, lost ease, lost versions of themselves that never fully lived. This grief is not a wound. It is a doorway. It allows them to honor the younger self they abandoned in order to survive. To acknowledge that growing up too fast was not their fault, even if it shaped everything. As this awareness deepens, they begin to understand something important. The maturity they built was real, but it was incomplete. They were strong because they had to be, but strength was never meant to be their entire identity. And now, with time, they begin to weave new threads into their sense of self, threads of warmth, curiosity, and gentleness. In relationships, this looks like letting someone in a little more, allowing silence to be comfortable rather than heavy, saying I'm tired without shame, trusting that their needs will not scare someone away, trusting that they deserve care as much as they give it. Internally, this looks like becoming less rigid with themselves, allowing mistakes, allowing rest days, allowing moments where they don't have all the answers, allowing themselves to not be the emotional anchor every time. Their nervous system begins to relearn safety, slowly, cautiously, softly. The hypervigilance recedes, the tension in their chest loosens, the permanent readiness to protect begins to fade. This is the soft return, not to childhood, but to wholeness. A return to the parts of themselves that never had a chance to grow. A return to the emotions they silenced. A return to the dreams they put away. And with each step, they begin to feel something unfamiliar but beautiful: alignment. Their inner age and outer age slowly meet. Their maturity becomes a choice, not a reflex. their softness becomes a strength, not a threat. Healing does not make them younger, it makes them truer. And in that truth, they discover a kind of peace they never knew they were allowed to have. By the time a person reaches this part of their journey, something inside them has already shifted, not loudly, not with celebration, but with the quiet certainty of a season changing, a slow thawing, an internal exhale, a recognition that life no longer needs to be felt from a distance. What once seemed like permanent emotional age begins to soften, revealing something gentler beneath the surface. A person who is finally becoming themselves. This becoming is not a return to youth, nor an attempt to reclaim a childhood that was never fully lived. It is something deeper, more intricate, the merging of all the selves they once had to separate. The strong self that carried responsibilities too early, the quiet self that hid to stay safe, the tender self that longed for comfort but never asked, the wise self that emerged long before its time. All of them begin to take their place, not in conflict, but in harmony. There is a quiet dignity in this integration. A person who once felt older than everyone around them begins to realize that age, inner or outer, was never the real story. The real story was how much they endured, how deeply they felt, how carefully they navigated worlds that overwhelmed them. Feeling older was simply the echo of all the moments they survived alone. As they grow into this new space, they start to see themselves with softer eyes. They look at their past not with bitterness, but with understanding. They see the childhood version of themselves, the one who stayed calm during storms, who anticipated danger before it arrived, who learned maturity as a shield. And they feel compassion rather than sorrow. They realize this child was not wise. They were alert, not strong, just unprotected, not mature, simply adapting. And suddenly the narrative changes. Feeling older no longer feels like a burden. It feels like a story, one that shaped them but does not confine them. A story of endurance, sensitivity, and emotional intelligence that was born in difficult soil. A story of someone who felt too much too soon, yet carried it all with grace no one witnessed. A story that deserves to be honored, not hidden. In this acceptance, they find a new kind of peace. A peace that comes from knowing they are allowed to slow down, allowed to rest, allowed to feel young in moments where their heart finally feels safe, allowed to discover who they are outside the roles they once had to play. This peace expresses itself in subtle ways. They smile more freely. They trust more softly. They let relationships unfold without controlling every outcome. They allow others to carry them sometimes, just as they carried so many. They begin to understand that vulnerability is not a risk. It is a bridge, a quiet opening into a life that feels less like survival and more like belonging. And in this belonging, they discover something unexpected. They were never old souls. They were souls that worked too hard, souls that stayed awake for too long, souls that carried darkness without guidance, lightness without safety, hope without support. They feel older because they lived emotionally in fast forward, but now, as they return to themselves, they begin to realize that their inner age can be rewritten, not erased, simply rebalanced. They learn that maturity does not need to exclude softness, that wisdom does not need to exclude wonder, that caution does not need to exclude joy. The echo of their old self remains, a reminder of everything they survived, but it no longer defines them. It simply accompanies them like a gentle shadow that no longer frightens, no longer controls. It becomes a companion, not a cage. And slowly they become someone new. A person whose age is not measured by the heaviness of their past, but by the wholeness of their present. A person who can finally live at the pace of their own heartbeat, not the pace of their old survival. They are no longer the child who grew too fast, no longer the young adult who felt too old, no longer the soul trapped between ages. They are simply themselves, a life no longer carried, but lived.